Picture this a dimly lit room, where the only sound is the faint scratching of quills against parchment. The air smells of ink and beeswax, and the flickering glow of candlelight dances across pages adorned with gold leaf and vibrant pigments. This is the heart of a medieval scriptorium, where monks and artists spent countless hours transforming blank parchment into dazzling, illuminated manuscripts. But these weren't just beautiful works of art, they were lifelines. In an era of upheaval, when wars, plagues, and political chaos threatened to erase knowledge itself, these painstakingly crafted pages became vaults of survival, preserving everything from scientific discoveries to sacred texts. How did these artists turn simple parchment into portals of wisdom that could outlast empires? The answer lies in the extraordinary blend of skill, devotion, and ingenuity that went into every stroke of the brush. Illuminated manuscripts were more than just books, they were masterpieces of storytelling, where every color, symbol, and margin doodle carried meaning. Some pages held medical remedies to heal the sick, others mapped the stars, guiding travelers through treacherous journeys. Hidden within the intricate borders and gleaming gold were secrets meant to educate, inspire, and even protect those who knew how to read them. These artists didn't just paint, they encoded survival into their work, ensuring that knowledge could withstand the test of time. Today, we're stepping into their world. Together, we'll uncover how these medieval creators turned pigment and parchment into enduring legacies. From the origins of illumination to the hidden messages tucked between lines of text, we'll explore how art and knowledge became inseparable allies in the fight against oblivion. This is a story of resilience, of beauty born from necessity, and of the unsung heroes who painted the past into permanence. So grab your virtual candle. We're about to open the pages of history and discover the illuminated secrets that kept the medieval world alive. When the Roman Empire crumbled, Europe plunged into centuries of instability. Libraries burned, schools vanished, and the written word itself seemed in danger of disappearing. But in the quiet corners of monasteries, a flicker of hope remained. Monks became the unsung guardians of knowledge, transforming their cloisters into fortresses of learning where ancient texts were copied, studied, and given new life. This was the dawn of illuminated manuscripts, born not from luxury but from necessity. In scriptoria, the bustling workshops of these monasteries, scribes hunched over parchment with quills in hand, while artists filled margins with swirling vines and radiant gold. Every stroke was an act of defiance against oblivion. The process began with parchment made from animal skins scraped thin and stretched taut, a far cry from the paper we know today. Ink was painstakingly mixed from soot, oak galls, or even crushed insects, while pigments came from the earth itself. Lapis lazuli for deep blues, malachite for vibrant greens, and cinnabar for fiery reds. Gold leaf, applied with a breath of adhesive, made pages shimmer like sunlight through stained glass. But the real magic lay in collaboration. Scribes copied text letter by letter, leaving space for illuminators to weave stories within stories. A botanical drawing might double as a medical guide. A biblical scene could hide astrological symbols. These weren't just books, they were layered tapestries of meaning, where every detail served a purpose. What's striking is how these manuscripts bridged worlds. Greek philosophy met Christian theology in the margins. Arabic scientific texts, translated and illuminated, found their way into European hands. In an age before printing presses, each manuscript was a one-of-a-kind masterpiece, carrying knowledge across generations. The artists who made them understood their power, They weren't just decorating pages, but ensuring survival. When wars raged outside monastery walls, these illuminated treasures kept ideas alive, waiting patiently for a brighter future. And that future, as we'll see, would owe everything to their patience and craft. Behind every illuminated manuscript stood an army of unsung artists, monks, scribes, and even lay craftsmen whose names history often forgot. These were not just painters but scholars, theologians, and alchemists of color, bound by a sacred mission to preserve knowledge. Their training began as young apprentices, kneeling for hours in chilly scriptoria, mastering the steady hand required for flawless calligraphy before ever touching a brush. A single mistake could ruin months of work, so discipline was carved into their routine like the letters they inked. Days stretched from dawn to dusk, guided by the rhythm of prayer bells and the flicker of tallow candles. One surviving note in a margin reads, "The parchment is hairy, the light is dim. My hand aches, but my soul sings." Their work was as much about devotion as it was about skill. Many believed each stroke brought them closer to the divine, transforming labor into liturgy. A scribe copying scripture might pause to trace a saint's face with reverence, while an illuminator weaving gold into a capital letter saw it as an echo of heavenly light. Even the pigments held spiritual weight. Ultramarine blue, ground from precious lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, was reserved for the Virgin Mary's robes, symbolizing purity and sacrifice. Greens from verdigris whispered of renewal, while reds often mixed with egg yolk in tempera evoked the blood of martyrs. The tools of their trade were humble yet transformative. Quills came from goose or swan feathers, carefully split to control ink flow. Brushes were fashioned from squirrel or ferret hair, fine enough to paint eyelashes on miniature figures. Pigments were mixed with binders like gum, arabic, or egg, creating luminous hues that defied time. Gold leaf, applied with a rabbit hair brush and polished with agate, made pages glow as if lit from within. And though their names faded into history, their legacy didn't. In the curve of a vine or the glint of a gilded border, you can still feel the heartbeat of those who believed beauty was a form of survival. What's remarkable is how these artisans balanced austerity with extravagance. They lived simply, eating plain meals, sleeping on straw pallets, yet poured riches onto the page, lavishing manuscripts with materials worth a king's ransom. A single book might consume the labor of 30 men over a year, its cost equal to a small farm. But to them, value wasn't measured in coin. It was in the whispered prayers between lines, the medicinal recipes tucked beside psalms, the star charts that guided farmers and healers alike. Their pages weren't just read, they were lived in, a testament to the idea that knowledge, when made beautiful, could outlast empires. The journey of an illuminated manuscript began long before brush touched parchment. It started with the very skin of animals. Parchment makers would soak sheep, goat, or calf hides in lime water for days to loosen hair and flesh, then stretch them taut on wooden frames, scraping away imperfections with crescent-shaped knives. The result, a smooth, durable surface that could last centuries if treated with care. But even the finest parchment wasn't perfect. Some sheets bore hair follicles or subtle scars, reminders of the living creatures that made this art possible. Scribes often worked around these flaws, turning blemishes into part of the page story, like a painter incorporating a knot in wood grain into their masterpiece. Next came the quill, the scribe's most trusted tool. Not just any feather would do. Goose or swan primaries were prized for their strength and flexibility. The process of transforming a feather into a writing instrument was an art in itself. The tip would be carefully hardened with heat, then slit with a precision knife to control ink flow. A well-cut quill could glide across parchment for hours, its nib wearing down like a pencil until it needed reshaping, and the ink far from simple black liquid. Iron gall ink, the medieval gold standard, was brewed from oak gall swellings on oak trees caused by wasp larvae, mixed with iron salts and gum arabic. This created a rich, dark hue that aged to a warm brown over time, as if the pages themselves were breathing. But the true spectacle began when the Illuminators took over. Their palette read like a map of the known world. Ultramarine blue from distant Afghan mines where lapis lazuli was hauled across deserts and seas, vibrant green from malachite or verdigris, the latter scraped from weathered copper, and deep reds from cinnabar or crushed insects like kermes, whose dye was worth its weight in silver. Gold leaf, though, was the crowning glory. Beaten thinner than a butterfly's wing, it was laid onto adhesive made from garlic juice or glaire, whipped egg whites, then burnished until it gleamed like sunlight. Applying it required a steady hand and a held breath. One misstep, and the delicate sheet would crumple into waste. Colors weren't just decorative, they spoke a silent language. Gold symbolized divine light, often reserved for halos or sacred texts. Blue, the most expensive pigment, marked the holiest figures, the Virgin Mary's robe, the vault of heaven. Red, drawn from the blood of martyrs in medieval thought, framed urgent warnings or liturgical feasts. Even the whimsical doodles in margins called drolleries held meaning. A rabbit chasing a hunter might mock pride, while a snail battling a knight poked fun at chivalry's absurdities. Every stroke, from the grandest miniature to the tiniest border vine, was a deliberate act of storytelling. This alchemy of materials and meaning transformed blank parchment into something transcendent. A single manuscript page might contain the labor of a dozen hands: the parchment maker, the scribe, the pigment grinder, the gilder, all united by a shared purpose. They knew their work would outlive them, carried into the future like a message in a bottle. And though their names are lost, their legacy isn't. When you see the glow of gold on a 700-year-old page, you're not just looking at art. You're witnessing a pact across time, a promise that knowledge wrapped in beauty would never fade. Look closely at the curling vines framing a medieval manuscript's text, and you'll discover more than just decoration. You'll find an entire language of symbols whispering across the centuries. Every petal, creature, and knotwork border was a deliberate choice, a visual shorthand that transformed these pages into teaching tools for a world where many couldn't read words but could read images. Take the humble lily, often painted with meticulous care beside scenes of the Annunciation. Its white petals weren't just botanical accuracy, they signaled purity, a nod to the Virgin Mary's innocence. Even the colors spoke volumes. That radiant blue cloak on a saint, drawn from lapis lazuli so costly it was reserved for heaven's most sacred figures, telling viewers at a glance, this is holy. Animals, too, were never just animals. A lion might appear in 3 different guises within the same manuscript, first as a symbol of Christ's resurrection, thanks to a popular medieval belief that lion cubs were born dead and awakened by their father's breath, then as a warning against pride when shown hunting, and finally as a mark of noble courage in a knight's coat of arms. Even the whimsical creatures lurking in margins had purpose: a fox preaching to geese, a biting satire of corrupt clergy, a rabbit brandishing a sword. A playful reminder that the weak could triumph. These weren't doodles, they were moral lessons in disguise, designed to stick in the mind like rhymes in a nursery tale. Some symbols doubled as survival guides. Herbal manuscripts wove medicinal knowledge into their art, showing plants with roots, leaves, and flowers painted precisely enough to identify them in the wild, a visual pharmacy for healers. Calendars marked with zodiac signs weren't just astrology, They reminded farmers when to plant or harvest. A scene of Noah's Ark might subtly encode veterinary advice, with animals paired to show which species could share barns safely. This was knowledge wrapped in beauty, ensuring wisdom endured even if words were forgotten. The genius of these symbols lay in their layers. A grapevine might represent Christ's blood at the Last Supper, and the communal bonds of a village's wine-making tradition, and a practical tip for fermenting medicines. For an illiterate peasant, the vine's twisting tendrils could evoke Sunday sermons. For a monk, they recalled biblical verses. For a healer, they signaled the season to gather remedies. No wonder these manuscripts were treasured like libraries. In a single volume, they spoke to everyone, regardless of rank or education. And as we'll see, that universal language didn't just preserve faith or morals. It safeguarded the very secrets of life and death, from plague remedies to the rhythms of the stars. Beneath the gold leaf and vivid pigments of illuminated manuscripts lay something far more practical than beauty. They were medieval survival kits disguised as art. In an age when plagues could wipe out villages and failed harvests meant starvation, these books weren't just for prayer or prestige. They were lifelines packed with the kind of knowledge that could mean the difference between life and death. Monastic scribes didn't merely copy scripture. They compiled encyclopedias of herbal remedies, star charts for planting seasons, and even instructions for purifying water. A single manuscript might contain a cure for fever tucked between psalms, or a diagram showing which lunar phase was best for bloodletting. This wasn't just scholarship, it was emergency preparedness, painted in colors bright enough to catch the eye and memorable enough to stick in the mind. Take the Tachuanum Sanatotes, a dazzling medieval health manual where every page bursts with life. Instead of dry lists of symptoms, it offered vibrant scenes of daily life. Farmers harvesting lettuce prescribed for insomnia, bakers pulling loaves from ovens noted for digestion, even couples arguing a warning against excess anger. Each illustration paired with concise advice: chicory root for liver health, rose water for headaches, the ideal sleeping position to avoid nightmares. These weren't abstract concepts but visual lessons, designed so even someone who couldn't read Latin could follow the guidance. The book treated health as a balance between 6 essentials: food, air, exercise, sleep, emotions, and bodily fluids, a holistic approach startlingly modern in its scope. Agriculture, too, found its way into illuminated pages. Calendars adorned with zodiac signs weren't just mystical decorations, they were farming almanacs. A page showing Taurus the bull might mark the week to plant barley, while Virgo's appearance signaled time to harvest grapes. Monasteries, often the largest landowners in a region, depended on these illustrated guides to feed entire communities. The Luttrell Psalter, famous for its whimsical marginalia, also contains some of the most detailed depictions of medieval plowing techniques, soil preparation, and even pest control, like using crushed walnut leaves to keep insects from stored grain. Astronomy and medicine intertwined in these pages. The vivid blue skies of illuminated star charts didn't just map constellations. They tracked the best times for surgeries believed to be safer under certain planetary alignments, or the brewing of medicines. A 13th century manuscript now in Barcelona's archives shows a surgeon removing a kidney stone, with the moon's phase carefully noted beside the scene, a reminder that even surgery followed celestial rhythms. Other texts blended science and superstition, like the belief that sapphire-toned inks could ward off plague if used to write protective prayers. What's extraordinary is how these manuscripts bridged disciplines without contradiction. A single page might juxtapose a biblical parable with a precise botanical drawing, a zodiac wheel, and a recipe for healing salve. To medieval minds, there was no divide between faith and physics, art and anatomy. The same hand that painted a saint's golden halo might diagram a human vein system with equal reverence. This unity of purpose to sustain both body and soul made illuminated manuscripts irreplaceable. They weren't locked away in libraries but used daily, their pages stained by fingertips, their margins annotated with new discoveries. And then there were the giants, the legendary manuscripts whose names still echo today. The Vienna Dioscurides, a 6th century Greek herbal, preserved ancient medical knowledge through Islamic scholars and Byzantine artists before reaching medieval Europe. Its pages overflow with hundreds of plant illustrations so accurate modern botanists can identify species. The Tres Riches Huras du Duc de Berry mixed lavish religious scenes with something revolutionary, the first known agricultural calendar showing peasant labor as worthy of artistic glory. These books became templates copied and adapted across centuries, their survival ensuring that even when wars or fires destroyed originals, the knowledge lived on. The true legacy of these manuscripts lies in their resilience. They weathered Viking raids, the Black Death, and the slow erosion of time because they were never just pretty pictures. They were the hard drives of their day, storing everything from how to set a broken bone to the prayers that might comfort the dying. In an era without printing presses or pharmacies, they stood as silent guardians of collective wisdom, proof that beauty and survival could be painted on the same page. Among the most breathtaking survivors of the medieval world is the Book of Kells, a manuscript so radiant with color and detail that legend claims it was crafted by angels. Created around the year 800 on the rugged island of Iona, off Scotland's coast, this masterpiece of Celtic artistry faced near annihilation when Viking raiders descended upon the monastery where it was made. Monks fled with their precious pages, crossing stormy seas to Ireland's sanctuary at Kells, where the book found its name and a temporary reprieve from destruction. But even there, it wasn't safe. The monastery was sacked repeatedly, its walls breached, its treasures plundered. Yet somehow, this illuminated gospel survived, wrapped in reverence and hidden away like a seed waiting to sprout after winter. Open its pages today and you're met with a symphony of artistry. The famed Cairo page, marking the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, explodes with swirling patterns, interlacing beasts and spirals so precise they seem to pulse with life. The letters themselves are alive serpents coil around inked curves, birds nest in the loops of X, and human faces peer from the flourishes. Every millimeter is a testament to patience and devotion, with pigments ground from rare minerals and gold leaf applied so thinly it shivers in the light. But this wasn't just decoration. The intricate knotwork, a hallmark of Celtic design, carried deeper meaning. Interlaced lines with no beginning or end mirrored the eternal nature of faith, while hidden animals, lions, peacocks, even otters, whispered biblical parables to those who knew how to look. What makes the Book of Kells extraordinary isn't just its beauty, but its defiance. Each vibrant page rebuked the chaos outside monastery walls, the raids, the wars, the slow unraveling of empires. It stood as proof that creativity could outlast violence, that knowledge guarded with passion could slip through the fingers of time. For centuries, it was used in sacred ceremonies, its pages turned by hands that understood its power not just as scripture, but as a shield against oblivion. When Henry Jones, the 17th century scholar who later inspired Indiana Jones, rescued it from a muddy ditch after Cromwell's troops ransacked Kells, he was saving more than a book. He was preserving a covenant between past and future. Yet the Book of Kells isn't alone in its triumph. Across Europe, other manuscripts whisper similar tales of resilience. The Lindisfarne Gospels, born in a Northumbrian monastery, survived Viking flames wrapped in jeweled covers. The Codex Aureus of Stockholm, a golden gospel book, was ransomed back from Vikings with literal tons of silver, its value deemed equal to a kingdom's treasury. Then there's the lesser-known but equally dazzling St. Gallen Globus, a tiny manuscript sphere mapping constellations, its survival a fluke of Swiss monastery archives. These books share more than beauty, they're battle scars in pigment and parchment, each a victory against the forces that sought to erase them. What binds them together is the unshakable belief of their makers that art could be armor, that a page glowing with color and care might outlast swords and sieges. They weren't wrong. Today, when we stand before the Book of Kells under museum glass, we're not just seeing a relic, we're witnessing the stubborn pulse of human ingenuity, a pulse that refused to stop beating, even when the world around it faltered. While the Book of Kells dazzles with its intricate Celtic knots, other manuscripts whisper equally compelling stories from the shadows of history. Take the Lindisfarne Gospels, created on a windswept English island around 715. Unlike its Irish cousin, this masterpiece blends Celtic spirals with Mediterranean influences, a visual echo of the monks' far-reaching connections. Its pages pulse with hidden geometry. If you measure the spacing between letters, you'll find ratios matching the harmonic scales of medieval music. But the real marvel lies in its colophon, a scribbled note revealing the artist's name, Eadfrith, Bishop of Lindisfarne. In an era when most creators faded into anonymity, this rare signature cracks open a window onto the man behind the quill, a scholar who likely painted by moonlight using a magnifying lens made of rock crystal. Then there's the Tres Riches Hures du Duc de Berry, a 15th century French treasure that revolutionized medieval art. Commissioned by a duke with a passion for books, its calendar pages burst with something radical, the dignity of peasant labor. February shows serfs warming frozen feet by a fire, their breath visible in the icy air. August depicts golden wheat fields under a lapis lazuli sky, reapers bending in rhythmic toil. These weren't just pretty scenes, they documented the feudal world's backbone, elevating everyday survival to the level of sacred art. The artists, the Limburg brothers, even snuck in a self-portrait, three young men reflected in a castle's polished armor, their faces peering from the margins like a medieval Easter egg. Less celebrated but no less brilliant is the Carmina Burana, a 13th century collection of wandering scholars' songs. Its pages mix bawdy drinking tunes with solemn hymns, all illustrated with marginalia of dancing bears and gambling monks. One unforgettable scene shows two rabbits dragging a bound hunter to court, a cheeky reversal of power that would have had medieval readers snickering. Beneath the humor, though, lies a poignant truth. These manuscripts preserved voices often excluded from official history, from lovelorn students to disillusioned clerics. Astrology meets artistry in the Vienna Codex 1283, where zodiac signs morph into farming advice. A page devoted to Gemini doesn't just show twins, it diagrams the ideal spacing between vegetable rows, while Virgo holds not wheat but a surgeon's scalpel, linking harvest time to medical best practices. These weren't abstract symbols but practical guides, blending celestial cycles with soil and scalpels. Preserving these treasures was a battle against time and turmoil. The Lindisfarne Gospels survived Viking raids sewn into its jeweled cover like a knight in armor. The Tres Riches Hures narrowly escaped destruction during the French Revolution, hidden in a nobleman's cellar. Many weren't so lucky. Fires, wars, and even well-meaning restorers erased countless masterpieces. A single drop of water could make gold leaf flake away. A century of sunlight might bleach vibrant greens to ghostly shadows. Yet against all odds, these pages endured, carrying forward not just beauty, but the heartbeat of an era that refused to be forgotten. Fire, flood, and the ravages of war, these were the relentless enemies of every illuminated manuscript. Each book was a fragile treasure, vulnerable to the slightest spark or blade. When Viking longships appeared on the horizon, monks at Lindisfarne scrambled to gather their precious Gospels before fleeing inland, knowing the illuminated pages in their arms were worth more than gold. In Normandy, scribes buried manuscripts beneath monastery floors as Norman invaders burned libraries. Even the grandest works weren't safe. The Cotton Library fire of 1731 nearly destroyed the sole surviving copy of Beowulf, its edges charred like autumn leaves. Yet against these odds, so many survived, shielded by sheer human determination. Neglect could be as deadly as violence. Parchment crumbled if stored in damp cellars. Gold leaf flaked away when touched by careless hands. Some manuscripts were scraped clean and reused, their original art vanishing beneath new text, a practice called palimpsesting. Others were dismembered, their jeweled covers pried off for profit, leaving pages to scatter like orphan puzzle pieces. But sometimes neglect became salvation. When Henry VIII dissolved England's monasteries, countless manuscripts were stashed in barns or used to line pie tins, unknowingly preserved by their obscurity, until scholars centuries later recognized their worth beneath the grease stains. Modern conservators now wage a gentler battle against time. In climate-controlled vaults, manuscripts rest under filtered light, their pages supported by custom cradles to prevent stress on brittle spines. Multispectral imaging reveals erased texts, while tiny brushes of rabbit hair sweep away centuries of dust without disturbing pigment. One groundbreaking technique involves injecting collagen into crumbling parchment, essentially giving the animal skin a second life. At Cambridge's Fitzwilliam Museum, a team spent 3 years restoring the Macclesfield Psalter, millimeter by millimeter, using magnifying glasses and surgical tools. Their reward: watching 12th century blues glow anew under museum lights. Yet the greatest shift came not from conservation, but innovation: the printing press. When Gutenberg's invention spread across Europe in the 1400s, it didn't erase illuminated manuscripts, it transformed their purpose. Suddenly, books could be mass-produced, but they lacked the artistry of hand-painted pages. Wealthy patrons still commissioned lavish manuscripts, now as status symbols rather than necessities. Scribes adapted too, some joined printing houses, their skills redirected to designing typefaces based on Gothic script. The last great illuminated works, like the 16th century Book of Hours for Anne of Brittany, became swan songs of a fading craft, their beauty undimmed even as the world moved on. What's astonishing isn't just that these manuscripts survived, but how they did, through monks' courage, scholars' luck, and now science's precision. Each preservation story is a thread in history's tapestry, connecting the hands that painted them to those who guard them today. And though the printing press changed everything, it couldn't replicate the heartbeat of a manuscript, the faint brushstrokes where an artist's breath might still linger. Gutenberg's press didn't just print books, it reshaped the entire landscape of knowledge, turning what was once a painstaking craft into something that could be replicated with startling speed. By the mid-1500s, printing presses across Europe were churning out thousands of books, making texts accessible to merchants, students, and even ordinary townsfolk. Suddenly, the labor of months, a single illuminated manuscript, could be outpaced in days. But this revolution came with a bittersweet twist. As printed books spread like wildfire, the radiant artistry of hand-painted pages began to dim. No longer the primary vessels of wisdom, illuminated manuscripts became relics of a vanishing world, their gold leaf and lapis lazuli overshadowed by crisp, uniform type. Yet this wasn't just a story of obsolescence, it was a transformation, where the old and new collided in unexpected ways. Artisans who once spent their lives illuminating parchment faced a stark choice: adapt or fade. Some found work in the printing houses, their delicate skills repurposed to design ornate initials or decorative borders for early printed books, a bridge between craftsmanship and mass production. Others turned to luxury markets, creating lavish manuscripts for nobles who still prized their exclusivity. The Medici family, for instance, commissioned handwritten psalters long after printed Bibles became commonplace, treating them as heirlooms rather than tools. But many illuminators watched their trade dwindle, their painstaking techniques outpaced by the relentless efficiency of movable type. What's fascinating is how printed books mimicked and mocked their illuminated predecessors. Early printers used red ink to mimic rubrics, the bold heading scribes once painted by hand. They left blank spaces for buyers to add their own illustrations, a nod to the illuminated tradition. Some even fooled the eye with woodcut borders that imitated swirling vines and gold leaf, though the effect was a pale shadow of the real thing. The message was clear: the beauty of manuscripts couldn't be replicated, but their utility could be surpassed. Yet, just as the press seemed to relegate illumination to history, the Renaissance sparked a paradoxical revival. Scholars rediscovered medieval manuscripts not as outdated curiosities, but as masterpieces. The Vatican Library under Pope Nicholas V became a sanctuary for these works, their pages studied by humanists who marveled at the blend of art and learning. Artists like Albrecht Dürer pored over Gothic illuminations, borrowing their intricate borders for engravings. Even the printing press, which had made manuscripts obsolete, now reproduced their images. Woodcuts of medieval miniatures appeared in herbals and scientific texts, ensuring the old artistry lived on in new forms. The legacy of illumination didn't vanish, it seeped into the cultural groundwater. The vibrant colors of stained glass, the detailed frescoes of Renaissance chapels, even the heraldic emblems of royal courts all carried echoes of the scriptorium. And when William Morris launched the arts and crafts movement centuries later, he drew direct inspiration from those medieval pages, proving that the marriage of beauty and utility could never truly go out of style. The press may have ended an era, but it couldn't erase the luminous fingerprints of those who painted knowledge into survival. Just as the medieval world faded into history, something unexpected happened. The Renaissance, that great rebirth of classical learning, found itself enchanted by the very manuscripts it was supposed to replace. Scholars who once dismissed Gothic art as crude began paging through illuminated books with fresh eyes, recognizing not just their beauty, but their sophistication. Petrarch, the father of humanism, kept a personal book of hours, its margins filled with his own handwritten notes. The Vatican Library, under Pope Nicholas V, became a sanctuary for these works, where scribes and artists studied them alongside rediscovered Greek texts. What was old became new again, not as a relic, but as a revelation. Albrecht Dürer, the German master whose engravings would define an era, spent hours sketching from medieval manuscripts, their intricate borders and expressive figures seeping into his work. Look closely at his famous Apocalypse series, and you'll see the ghost of illumination, the swirling drapery of saints echoing the flowing lines of Gothic miniatures, the dense symbolism that could have been lifted straight from a monk's marginalia. Even the great Leonardo da Vinci owned a fragment of a medieval herbal, its precise plant drawings likely influencing his own anatomical studies. These artists weren't copying, they were conversing across time, finding in these pages a bridge between the sacred intensity of the Middle Ages and the humanist fire of the Renaissance. The revival wasn't just artistic, it was scholarly. Monastic libraries, long neglected, were ransacked not by invaders but by historians. the Florentine bookseller Vespasiano da Bisticci became famous for tracking down crumbling manuscripts, selling them to collectors who prized their rarity. One of his clients, the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, built a library rivaling the ancient library of Alexandria, its shelves glittering with illuminated treasures. Meanwhile, in Venice, the printer Aldus Manutius made a radical choice. He began reproducing medieval texts not as cheap print, but as lavish facsimiles, using the new technology to preserve the old artistry. Fast forward to today, and the fascination hasn't faded, it's evolved. Modern technology now peels back layers of these manuscripts we could never see before. Multispectral imaging reveals erased texts, like a palimpsest in the Vatican that turned out to contain a lost work by Archimedes, hidden beneath a 14th century prayer book. X-ray fluorescence uncovers pigments too faint for the naked eye, showing how artists mixed their colors. In Oxford, researchers used ultraviolet light to expose scribbles in the margins of the Bodleian's manuscripts, notes from medieval readers debating the text, their voices suddenly audible after centuries. Perhaps the most poignant twist is how digitization, the descendant of Gutenberg's press, has given these books a second afterlife. Websites like the British Library's Turning the Pages project let anyone zoom into brushstrokes a monk made 800 years ago, rotating virtual pages as if holding the real thing. It's a far cry from the scriptorium's candlelight, but the goal remains the same: to keep these illuminated pages alive, not behind glass, but in the hands, real or virtual, of those who still find wonder in their glow. Hidden beneath the gold and pigments of medieval manuscripts lie secrets even their creators couldn't foresee: erased sketches, lost annotations, entire layers of text waiting centuries to be rediscovered. Today, technology acts like a time machine, peeling back the years with tools those monks could never have imagined. Take ultraviolet imaging, which transforms faded ink into bold strokes under fluorescent light, revealing scribbles in margins that were once dismissed as blank. At the Walters Art Museum, this technique exposed a 12th century scribe's trial run's awkward first attempts at capital letters, later painted over in perfection. These ghostly traces humanize the process, showing us that even masters stumbled before their work gleamed. Multispectral analysis goes deeper, capturing wavelengths invisible to the naked eye. When researchers at the University of Cambridge scanned the 15th century Bohun Psalter, they uncovered something astonishing. Beneath a serene portrait of the Virgin Mary lay a rough sketch of her weeping, her face contorted in grief. The artist had changed course, opting for serenity over sorrow, burying his first vision like a secret. Elsewhere, this technology has resurrected entire texts from palimpsests, parchments scraped clean and reused. The Archimedes palimpsest, a prayer book overwriting ancient Greek mathematics, yielded lost theorems when spectral imaging teased apart the layers, proving that medieval recycling sometimes preserved more than it erased. Digitization completes the miracle, turning fragile manuscripts into global treasures. The British Library's Digitized Manuscripts project lets anyone zoom into the brushstrokes of the Lindisfarne Gospels, rotating pages with a fingertip as if holding them in a monastic scriptorium. In Dublin, the Book of Kells can be explored online, its intricate spirals magnified to show individual hairline cracks in pigment, details even visitors behind museum glass can't see. This isn't just preservation, it's democratization. A student in Mumbai can study the same details as a scholar at Oxford, and a child in Buenos Aires can trace the inked whiskers of a medieval cat doodled beside a psalm. The impact ripples beyond academia. Contemporary artists like Matthew Paris, no relation to his 13th century namesake, use these digital archives to inspire new works, blending medieval motifs with modern design. Video game developers mine illuminated bestiaries for creature designs, while calligraphers rediscover forgotten scripts from high-resolution scans. Even pop culture feels the influence. The swirling borders in Game of Thrones opening credits owe a debt to Celtic knotwork, and fantasy novels borrow manuscript symbolism for world-building. What's extraordinary isn't just that we've saved these pages from decay, but that we've given them new life. A monk illuminating a Bible in the year 800 never imagined his work would one day flicker on screens in Tokyo or Cape Town. Yet here we are, connected across time by the same human impulse to create, to preserve, and to share stories that outlast us. The gold leaf may tarnish, but the light it carries never truly fades. The swirling vines and radiant gold of medieval manuscripts didn't vanish with the Middle Ages. They slithered into our modern imagination, reshaping everything from blockbuster films to best-selling novels. Take Game of Thrones, where the show's iconic opening sequence mirrors the intricate geography of illuminated maps, its floating cities and unfolding sigils echoing the way medieval scribes depicted kingdoms as divine puzzles. Even the show's prop masters leaned into the aesthetic, crafting fictional manuscripts like the Book of Brothers with gilded initials and blood-red margins, as if ripped straight from a 15th-century scriptorium. This isn't just homage, it's a visual shorthand using the weight of history to make fantasy feel ancient and earned. Literature, too, breathes life into these old pages. Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose wove its murder mystery around a labyrinthine monastic library, where forbidden manuscripts held deadly secrets. The book's obsession with coded knowledge and the physicality of books, their smells, their textures mirrors the very real awe medieval readers felt when touching illuminated pages. Meanwhile, fantasy authors like Patrick Rothfuss and Susanna Clarke borrow manuscript symbolism to ground their worlds. Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell features footnotes styled like scholarly glosses, while Rothfuss's The Slow Regard of Silent Things includes diagrams reminiscent of alchemical marginalia. These aren't decorative touches, they're narrative tools, leveraging centuries of association between illuminated texts and hidden wisdom. Contemporary artists are pushing the tradition even further. London-based calligrapher Patricia Lovett revives medieval techniques, grinding pigments by hand and writing with quills on vellum to recreate historical pages. Her work isn't mere replication, it's dialogue, like her Bayeux Tapestry project, which reimagines the famous embroidery as an illuminated scroll. Across the Atlantic, the San Francisco-based Scriptorium project collaborates with scientists to analyze medieval pigments, then uses those recipes to create new works. One striking piece, the Climate Bestiary, pairs medieval-style animal illustrations with data on endangered species, proving illumination can still carry urgent messages. Yet this revival isn't without controversy, as manuscripts fetch astronomical prices at auction, like the Rothschild prayer book, sold for $13 million. Museums and nations clash over ownership. Greece demands the return of the Bible of Nycteris, looted by Crusaders in 1204, while Ethiopia's campaign to reclaim the Garima Gospels from European collections raises thorny questions. Can art ever be divorced from its cultural roots? Should a manuscript's survival justify its displacement? Even digitization sparks debate when a library scans a fragile gospel book. Does it democratize knowledge or strip the original of its sacred aura? The irony is profound. Medieval scribes painted to preserve ideas for the future, never imagining their work would fuel debates about copyright, colonialism, or climate activism. Yet here we are, still turning their pages both real and virtual, finding new meanings in the old glow. Whether pixelated on a screen or gleaming behind museum glass, these manuscripts remind us that beauty isn't just something we look at. It's something we reckon with. Consider the Ethiopian Garima Gospels, a radiant 1500-year-old manuscript hidden for centuries in a remote monastery, its pages glowing with colors so vivid they seem untouched by time. When European collectors whisked it away in the 19th century, it became a treasure behind glass in a foreign museum, admired but severed from the land that birthed it. This isn't just a story about one book. It's a microcosm of a fiery global debate. Who has the right to hold history's masterpieces? Proponents of repatriation argue these manuscripts are more than art. They're living fragments of cultural identity. For Ethiopia, the Garima Gospels aren't merely relics. They're sacred objects tied to the nation's founding myths, their loss a wound to collective memory. Similar battles rage over the Babylonian cuneiform tablets in the British Museum or the Aztec codices in Madrid, with nations demanding their return as acts of justice. These aren't trophies to display, argues one Ethiopian scholar, but pages from our ancestors' diaries stolen mid-sentence. Even preservation claims falter under scrutiny. While European museums boast climate-controlled vitrines, Ethiopia's monastic libraries have safeguarded parchment for millennia in humble conditions, proving stewardship isn't about wealth but devotion. Yet opposition voices warn of unintended consequences. Some fear returned artifacts could vanish into private collections or unstable regions where war or neglect might destroy them. The case of the Timbuktu manuscripts, miraculously saved from Al-Qaeda-linked militants by librarians who smuggled them out in donkey carts, shows the risks. Others cite the Universal Museum ideal, where centralized collections foster global scholarship. Culture has no borders, insists a curator in Berlin, where the iconic Ishtar Gate stands reassembled far from Iraq. Should we dismantle every museum and send art back to geographic origins, even if it means fragmenting human history? The heart of the conflict lies deeper than legal ownership. It's about narrative control. For centuries, Western institutions framed these works as discoveries, downplaying colonial violence that acquired them. A medieval psalter in a London gallery might bear a label about its artistic style, but not the siege that pried it from a monastery's hands. Critics argue this sanitized display perpetuates historical erasure, while repatriation could restore context. Imagine the Garima Gospels exhibited in Addis Ababa beside Ethiopian Orthodox priests who still chant their texts not as a static exhibit, but as a living tradition. Thankfully, new models are emerging. Some museums now loan artifacts long-term, like Sweden's return of Nicaraguan pre-Columbian objects under shared custody agreements. Digital replication offers another compromise. High-resolution scans allow global access while originals stay or return home, and grassroots projects empower communities to reclaim their heritage, like Ghana's Digital Repatriation Initiative, where elders use VR headsets to handle looted royal regalia held abroad, teaching youth about lost symbols. For those of us who aren't curators or activists, engagement starts with awareness. Seek out digitized manuscripts from their home institutions. Ethiopia's Heritage Fund offers stunning online access to repatriated works. Support museums that prioritize ethical sourcing and question exhibits that lack provenance transparency. When you stand before an illuminated page in Paris or New York, ask not just, "What is this?" but "How did it get here?" The answers might change how you see its glow. This debate isn't about rewriting history, it's about who gets to ink the next chapter. As we admire these painted pages, we're also grappling with a harder truth. Beauty doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's tangled in power, memory, and the unresolved debts of the past. You don't need a time machine to step into the world of illuminated manuscripts. Many of these treasures are closer than you think. Start with the British Library's Treasures Gallery in London, where the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Diamond Sutra share space under soft lighting, their pages turned periodically to reveal new wonders. Across the Channel, Paris's Bibliothèque Nationale de France houses the Tres Riches Hures, displayed in climate-controlled cases that let you lean in close enough to see the brushstrokes. But if travel isn't an option, digital portals bring these masterpieces to your screen. The Virtual Manuscript Library of Switzerland offers high-resolution scans where you can zoom into the whiskers of a marginal fox or the delicate veining of a painted leaf, while the digital Bodleian lets you turn pages of the Gutenberg Bible with a click. For those craving deeper context, books like the Illuminated Manuscript by Janet Backhouse or Christopher de Hamel's Meetings with Remarkable Manuscripts blend scholarly insight with page-turning storytelling. Documentaries like The Secret of Kells, inspired by the real Book of Kells, weave animation and history, perfect for family viewing. Prefer interactive learning? Platforms like Coursera offer courses on medieval art where you can analyze symbols alongside global classmates, while local calligraphy workshops, like those at the Getty Museum or even community centers, teach the exact strokes monks used, from quill cutting to gold leaf application. There's magic in tracing those same curves that a scribe perfected 800 years ago. Yet the true legacy of these manuscripts isn't just in viewing or recreating them, it's in the quiet wisdom they carry forward. The monks who painted these pages believed their work was a sacred dialogue between human hands and divine inspiration. Today, that spirit lives on when a child gashes at spotting a dragon in the margins of a digitized psalter, or when a calligraphy student pauses, breath held, to gild a single letter. These moments connect us across centuries to the artists who whispered over their work, "This is for the future." Their light hasn't faded, it's simply found new eyes. At first glance, medieval manuscripts seem split into two worlds, the sacred and the secular. On one side, Bibles and psalters glow with golden halos and solemn saints. On the other, chivalric romances burst with knights, dragons, and courtly love. Yet this duality is more illusion than reality. The truth, these pages were never truly separate. A prayer book might feature zodiac signs advising the best time for bloodletting, while a romance could include miniatures of the Virgin Mary hovering protectively over lovers. This blending wasn't accidental. It mirrored the medieval mindset where the divine and the everyday were threads in the same tapestry. Take the Hours of Jean Devereux, a 14th century prayer book. Its margins crawl with scenes of peasants harvesting grapes and hunters chasing stags, ordinary life unfolding alongside Christ's passion. The message was clear: spirituality wasn't confined to church walls. Even the lavish Tres Riches Hures, commissioned by a duke, pairs biblical scenes with agricultural calendars, suggesting that sowing crops could be as holy as singing psalms. Meanwhile, secular works like the Romance of the Rose smuggled in theological debates beneath tales of enchanted gardens, proving that medieval audiences didn't compartmentalize their curiosity. Faith and farming, prayer and poetry, all were part of one interconnected world. Women played a pivotal but often overlooked role in this fusion. While monks dominated scriptoria, noble women like Jeanne de Montbaston in Paris ran workshops producing everything from devotional books to racy fabliaux. Her illuminations in the Manus Codex show knights and ladies exchanging gifts, their vibrant robes echoing the stained glass of cathedrals. Across the Channel, the anonymous artist known as the Fastolf Master, likely a woman, painted manuscripts for English gentry, blending herbal remedies with prayers in the same volume. These women understood that a book could be both a spiritual guide and a practical manual, a duality their male counterparts sometimes missed. The real masterpiece was how these manuscripts held space for contradictions. A knight's tale might celebrate martial glory on one page, then show him kneeling in penance on the next. A medical manuscript could list charms to ward off demons alongside precise surgical diagrams. This wasn't confusion, it was honesty. Medieval life was messy, and their art reflected that. When we flip through these pages today, we're not just seeing pretty pictures. We're witnessing a world that refused to choose between heaven and earth, finding the sacred in the soil and the sublime in the everyday. Behind every shimmering page of medieval manuscripts, there's a story we've often missed: the quiet revolution of women's hands. While history books spotlight monks hunched over parchment, convents across Europe hummed with equally skilled scribes and illuminators, their contributions brushed into the margins of history. Take End, a 10th century Spanish nun who signed her name boldly on a Beatus manuscript. End, painter and servant of God. Her vibrant depictions of the apocalypse, writhing dragons, cities aflame rival anything from male workshops, yet for centuries scholars assumed End must have been a man. It wasn't until the 1950s that researchers confirmed the truth. One of the most gifted illuminators of her age was a woman. Convents became unexpected powerhouses of manuscript production. At the Abbey of Los Huelgas in Spain, nuns copied and illuminated sacred texts in a scriptorium of their own, their work indistinguishable from monastic output. In Germany, Hildegard of Bingen not only composed visionary theology, but likely supervised the dazzling illuminations in her Civias manuscripts, where celestial visions burst from the page in molten gold and lapis. These women didn't just imitate male techniques, they innovated. The nuns of Admont Abbey in Austria pioneered a distinctive style of floral borders, their delicate tendrils curling like living things, while the Gospels from a Rhineland convent feature one of the earliest known self-portraits by a female artist, a nun modestly peeking from the D of Dixit Dominus. Their work defied more than artistic norms. In an era when women were barred from universities and public life, convents offered rare access to learning. Manuscripts like the Rothschild Canticles, likely created by Flemish nuns, blend erotic mysticism with botanical precision, a daring mix no male scribe would risk. Other texts reveal practical subversion. The Hortus Deliciarum, compiled by Herod of Landsberg, taught theology through witty cartoons where virtues clobber vices with comically oversized weapons. These weren't just books, they were acts of quiet rebellion, proving women could be scholars, theologians, and artists. The reach of these female illuminators stretched far beyond cloister walls. Some convents operated like international studios, trading techniques across Europe. A Psalter made in Shaftesbury Abbey, England, shows clear influences from Byzantine models, evidence of networks linking nuns to merchants and pilgrims. Even more astonishing are the global threads. In Armenia, the scribe Mariam of Vaspurakan left colophons boasting of her speed and skill, while Ethiopian noblewomen commissioned Gospels where their portraits appeared beside evangelists, a privilege unimaginable in Europe. What's heartbreaking is how many names we've lost. Most medieval women couldn't sign their work, leaving us to guess at their presence through clues. A distinctly feminine script here, a marginal doodle of a nun at her desk there. But their legacy lingers in every stroke of color that refused to fade, every page that whispered, "We were here too." And as we turn to the global crossroads of illumination, remember, the light on these pages comes from countless hands, some robed in habits, others in silks from distant lands, all part of a story far bigger than the West has ever told. The golden threads of illuminated manuscripts didn't stop at Europe's borders. They wove through bustling Silk Road caravans and Byzantine trade ships, connecting scribes from Baghdad to Barcelona. While monks in Normandy painted saints with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, Islamic calligraphers in Cordoba were transforming Arabic script into hypnotic art, their ink glistening with the same crushed gold that gilded Christian psalters. This wasn't coincidence, it was a conversation across cultures where pattern books and pigments circulated like currency. Take the Al-Muwaffaq herbal, a 12th century Persian manuscript now in Vienna's archives. Its vibrant illustrations of medicinal plants mirror those in European herbals, down to the ruby-red poppies used to treat pain, proof that healing knowledge traveled alongside artistic techniques. Byzantine workshops were especially pivotal hubs. In Constantinople's scriptoria, artists blended Roman realism with Eastern abstraction, creating icons where saints' faces gleamed with a technique called chrysography, writing in liquid gold. When Crusaders looted the city in 1204, they carried home not just relics but illuminated Gospels that revolutionized European art. The Kludov Psalter, a 9th century Byzantine masterpiece, shows how fluidly motifs crossed borders. Its marginal doodles of irreverent monks, one gulping wine while another teeters on a ladder, echo the playful grotesques of French Gothic manuscripts, suggesting a shared visual humor that transcended language. Islamic manuscripts, forbidden from depicting human figures in sacred contexts, turned calligraphy into high art. Qurans like the Blue Quran of Tunisia stunned viewers with cobalt-dyed parchment and silver script, a technique that likely inspired the Carmina Burana's inked melodies on indigo pages. Geometric patterns from Islamic tilework snuck into European manuscripts too. Look closely at the Hours of Catherine of Cleves, and you'll find arabesques twisting like Moorish latticework around biblical scenes. Even tools traveled. The miktar, the angled reed pen used for Arabic script, influenced the cut of European quills, allowing scribes to achieve finer strokes. The economics behind this exchange were as intricate as the art itself. Pigment trade routes turned cities like Venice into medieval wall streets, where a sack of Afghan lapis could buy a merchant's villa. Geniza documents from Cairo's Jewish quarter reveal contracts between parchment dealers, ink makers, and ship captains, all racing to meet demand from monastic and madrasa clients. A single luxury manuscript's materials, gold leaf from Mali, ultramarine from Badakhshan, vellum from English sheep, might represent a year's revenue for a mid-sized town. No wonder princes pawned jewels to commission them. These weren't just books, but portable displays of wealth and diplomatic clout. What's often overlooked is the role of intermediaries. Armenian scribes, bridging Christian and Islamic worlds, produced hybrid masterpieces like the Mugni Gospels, where Byzantine faces peer from Persianate floral frames. Jewish illuminators in Spain crafted Haggadot that blended Hebrew text with Gothic borders, their workshops serving sultans and bishops alike. In Sicily's Norman courts, trilingual manuscripts Latin, Greek, and Arabic rolled off royal presses, their margins a riot of intersecting traditions. This wasn't appropriation, it was alchemy where each culture transformed what it received. The real surprise, how much was lost in translation, literally. When a Persian astronomical text reached Toledo, translators might misread a diagram, accidentally inventing a new constellation that migrated into European star charts. A misheard Arabic term for eyebrow could become ivory in a Latin bestiary, explaining why some medieval unicorns sported suspiciously arched horns. These errors birthed fresh creativity, proving that cultural exchange thrives not on purity, but on productive misunderstandings. By the 14th century, the manuscript trade had birthed something unprecedented, a pan-Eurasian aesthetic. From the Jami al-Tawarik in Tabriz to the Grandes Chroniques de France, artists shared a visual vocabulary of chrysanthemum borders, peacock feather palettes, and dragon-tailed initials. That shared language didn't erase local styles, it enriched them. And as we'll see next, this flourishing trade didn't just transform art, it built the economic scaffolding for the Renaissance itself. Creating an illuminated manuscript wasn't just an artistic endeavor. It was a financial gamble that could bankrupt a monastery or elevate a noble's reputation to legendary status. Consider the raw materials alone. A single page of high-quality parchment required the skin of an entire calf, scraped, soaked, and stretched over days. The cost roughly equivalent to a peasant's weekly wages. Then came the pigments ultramarine blue, mined from remote Afghan mountains and shipped across continents, was more expensive than gold by weight. A scribe's quill might be cheap, but the ink iron gall recipes demanded oak galls, a byproduct of wasp infestations, collected in specific seasons and fermented for months. And let's not forget the gold leaf, beaten so thin that a single ounce could cover 100 pages, yet still worth a small fortune. Patrons understood the stakes. When the Duke of Berry commissioned the Tres Riches Jurors in the early 1500s, the project consumed nearly 2 decades and a sum rumored to rival the construction of a castle. For nobles like him, these books weren't just devotional objects, they were power plays. A lavishly illuminated manuscript on display during diplomatic visits signaled wealth, piety, and cultural sophistication all at once. Even the church invested heavily, with bishops funneling tithes into scriptoria as both spiritual duty and political strategy. A well-stocked library could elevate a monastery's prestige, attracting pilgrims and patronage. But the economics weren't just about prestige, they shaped the art itself. To cut costs, some workshops recycled older manuscripts, scraping off texts to reuse parchment, a practice revealing lost works today through spectral imaging. Others employed shortcuts, like substituting cheaper azurite for lapis lazuli, or using tin foil beneath translucent glaze to mimic gold. The market also birthed tiers of quality. Luxury volumes for kings, simpler pocket Bibles for traveling priests, and even penny hoary, mass-produced prayer books with rushed illuminations for the rising merchant class. Fast forward to today, and the stakes are just as high, but the players have changed. In 2019, the Rothschild prayer book sold at Christie's for $13.6 million, setting a record for medieval manuscripts. Auction houses now battle over discoveries like the Hours of Jean de Navarre, a long-lost book of hours found in a private collection, its value inflated by rarity and royal provenance. Yet with soaring prices comes shadowy commerce. Forgeries flood the market, some cunning enough to fool experts like the Spanish forger, a 19th-century con artist whose fake medieval miniatures still occasionally surface in auctions. Even legitimate sales spark controversy, as institutions and private buyers outbid nations seeking to reclaim cultural heritage. Beneath the gilded surfaces lies a darker ledger. Many manuscripts were funded by exploitative systems, monastic lands worked by serfs, or noble coffers filled through war and taxation. Some pigments carried human costs. Cinnabar red was mined by prisoners in deadly conditions, while the vibrant greens in the Book of Kells may have sickened the artists who ground toxic malachite into powder. And let's not forget the quiet erasures, anonymous scribes and illuminators, some likely indentured or enslaved, whose labor built fortunes for others. This tension between beauty and brutality, devotion and domination echoes in every gleaming page. As we turn now to the secrets hidden within these manuscripts, remember, the gold that catches your eye may have been mined by hands that never held a book. Beneath the radiant colors of illuminated manuscripts lie shadows we've long overlooked: the hands of enslaved and coerced laborers who mined the pigments, prepared the parchment, and toiled in conditions far removed from the serene scriptorium. Recent research has begun peeling back these layers, revealing uncomfortable truths that disrupt the romantic image of medieval artistry. Take the vibrant vermilion gracing so many sacred texts. Its key ingredient, cinnabar, was often extracted by prisoners and enslaved workers in Spanish mines, where toxic mercury vapors shortened lives to mere years. The shimmering gold leaf adorning halos, mined by forced labor in West African kingdoms, then transported across the Sahara in caravans where human lives were traded alongside precious metals. Even the parchment underfoot, stretched, scraped, and bleached animal skin, relied on peasant labor, with serfs tied to monastic estates tending the flocks that supplied this vital medium. Scholars like Dr. Alix Bovey have traced supply chains through customs records and guild ledgers, exposing how luxury manuscripts were built on systems of exploitation. A single 14th century psalter might contain pigments from Afghan lapis mines worked by child laborers, inks sourced from oak galls harvested by indentured peasants, and bindings stitched with thread spun in workhouses. The irony is stark. Books meant to glorify divine love were sometimes crafted from human suffering. This isn't to dismiss the devotion of scribes and illuminators, but to acknowledge the full ecosystem that made their work possible, one where piety and oppression coexisted. The revelation challenges modern nostalgia for the purity of medieval art. We imagine monks laboring in peaceful solitude, yet their quills depended on global networks of coercion. A Benedictine copying scripture by candlelight might never know the chains that brought him his ultramarine, just as a duke admiring his new Book of Hours wouldn't ponder the serfs who rendered the vellum. But ignorance doesn't erase complicity. As Dr. Brian Keane notes in Toward a Global Middle Ages, recognizing these threads doesn't diminish the manuscript's beauty, it deepens our understanding of their true cost. Yet even within this darkness, humanity flickers. Marginal doodles in some manuscripts hint at resistance. A worker's face peeking from a border vine, a tiny clenched fist beside a gilded letter. In the Copenhagen Psalter, a weary-looking pigment grinder leans on his mortar, his slumped posture at odds with the page's glory. These aren't accidents, they're quiet testimonies, reminding us that art's legacy is as complex as the hands that made it. And then, as if to defy the weight of these truths, the manuscripts themselves offer relief: whimsical, irreverent margins where scribes and artists snuck in laughter. A rabbit jousting with a snail, a monk sneaking a kiss from a nun, a fox preaching to geese with exaggerated piety. This playful subversion, known as drollery, reveals a medieval world far more nuanced than piety or oppression alone. Perhaps these jests were coping mechanisms, or maybe they were acts of defiance, tiny rebellions in ink. Whatever their purpose, they remind us that even in the shadow of exploitation, creativity found ways to dance. Flip to any random page of a medieval manuscript, and you might stumble upon something startling: a knight in full armor fleeing from a giant snail, or a monkey dressed as a bishop preaching to a crowd of rabbits. These bizarre doodles, known as marginalia, are the medieval equivalent of internet memes, irreverent inside jokes that reveal the playful side of artists who are supposed to be solemnly copying scripture. Take the Smithfield decretals from 14th century England, where a fox in a monk's robe delivers a fake sermon to a flock of geese, his sly grin telegraphing the punchline before the unsuspecting birds become his lunch. Another favorite trope, the snail battles. Dozens of manuscripts feature knights clashing with mollusks, their lances snapping against shell armor. Art historians still debate the meaning. Were these satires of cowardly nobles or just running gags among scribes stuck in tedious work? The humor wasn't just random, it was subversive. In the margins of the Luttrell Psalter, a bare-bottomed musician plays a trumpet with his rear, a cheeky jab at the era's traveling minstrels. Over in France, the Hours of Jean Devereux includes a nun casually stealing a kiss from a monk, her wimple askew. These weren't just doodles, they were pressure valves in a rigid society, poking fun at hypocrisy and hierarchy under the guise of decoration. Even sacred texts weren't immune. The Gorleston Psalter features a rabbit beheading a hunter in a grisly role reversal, its tiny paws gripping an axe, a possible dig at oppressive landowners. What's remarkable is how personal these jokes feel. In the margins of a Belgian breviary, one exasperated scribe drew himself mid-scream, his inkai hands tearing at his hair beside the note, "Oh, my hand aches." Another, in the Canterbury Cathedral archives, sketched a grumpy self-portrait with the caption, "3 fingers hold the pen, but the whole body labors." These glimpses of frustration and wit remind us that behind every perfect Latin line were real people, artists who snuck their personalities onto the page when no one was looking. But marginalia wasn't just for laughs. Sometimes it smuggled in serious science. The same manuscripts with battling snails might feature precise botanical sketches in their margins, dandelions for liver health, chamomile for sleep, acting as visual sticky notes for healers. The De Materia Medica, a 6th century herbal, blends cheeky monkey doodles with accurate diagrams of medicinal roots, proving that humor and knowledge could share a page. Even astronomy got the meme treatment. One German psalter shows zodiac signs as farmers: Virgo holding a sickle, Taurus yoked to a plow, making celestial cycles relatable to peasants. This blend of comedy and curriculum reveals the true genius of medieval manuscripts. They weren't just pretty or pious, they were alive, breathing documents where a monk's groan about back pain could coexist with a groundbreaking star chart. And as we'll see next, those scientific margins would become lifelines, preserving remedies and rhythms that kept communities alive through plagues and famines. The artists knew something we're just rediscovering. Sometimes the best way to remember something serious is to paint it beside something silly. Tucked between the gilded letters and biblical scenes of medieval manuscripts, an entire cosmos of scientific knowledge hums quietly. Star charts drawn with the precision of astronomers, herbals cataloging cures in meticulous detail, alchemical symbols hiding experiments between prayers. These weren't just decorative flourishes, they were the cutting-edge laboratories of their time, where monks and artists preserved and advanced the scientific thought that would one day seed modern medicine, pharmacology, and even space exploration. The Vienna Dioscurides, a 6th century Greek manuscript now in Austria's National Library, is a prime example. Its pages burst with over 400 plant illustrations, so botanically accurate that modern herbalists still reference them. Each specimen labeled with medicinal uses: willow bark for pain relief, a precursor to aspirin, poppies for sleep, even fennel for digestive woes. What's striking isn't just the detail, but the methodology. These weren't static copies of older texts. Marginal notes show monks cross-referencing local flora, adjusting recipes based on trial and error, a medieval version of peer review. Astronomy thrived in these margins too. The Aratia, a 9th century Carolingian manuscript, transforms constellations into vivid miniatures. Hercules wrestles a serpent drawn in silver ink, now tarnished to black, while Orion's belt glitters with pinpricks of gold. But these weren't mere myths, they were functional tools. Calendars in psalters marked lunar phases for planting crops, while zodiac men figures with body parts linked to star signs guided medieval surgeons on when to operate. Never bleed a patient when the moon was in Aries, warned one text. The Tres Riches Hurras took it further, pairing celestial events with agricultural tasks. Taurus rising meant plow the fields. Virgo's appearance signaled grape harvest. This was science woven into daily survival, disguised as art. Alchemy's secrets also hid in plain sight. Symbols now associated with mysticism, the Ouroboros snake eating its tail. The sun and moon in conjunction first appeared in manuscripts like the Ripley Scroll, their cryptic diagrams encoding chemical processes. When a monk painted a pelican piercing its breast to feed its young with blood, it wasn't just a Christian allegory, it depicted the alchemical vessel used for distillation. These visual metaphors made abstract concepts tangible. A recipe for aurum potabile drinkable gold might snake around the margin of a prayer book, its steps illustrated with bubbling flasks and crowned lions representing purified metals. Modern chemists have recreated some formulas, finding traces of genuine metallurgical knowledge beneath the allegory, like the Mappy clavicula, which details alloy ratios for crafting stained glass that still dazzles in cathedrals today. The real breakthrough, though, was how these manuscripts democratized learning. Unlike locked-up monastery treasures, portable herbals and astrolabe manuals traveled with doctors and midwives. The Trotula, a 12th century text on women's health, circulated in vernacular copies with simplified illustrations. A mother feeling a feverish child's forehead, a healer grinding herbs making advanced medicine accessible beyond Latin literate clergy. Even children learned from illuminated diagrams. A surviving alphabet book from England uses animal illustrations, A for Araneus spider, B for bubo owl, to teach letters alongside natural science. What's often overlooked is the innovation in visualization. Faced with explaining the four humors or planetary orbits, artists invented infographics centuries before the term existed. The Sloane Manuscript's urine wheel, a circular chart diagnosing ailments by color and clarity, wouldn't look out of place in a modern medical textbook. Another text maps the human body as a microcosm of the universe, veins mirroring rivers, bones echoing mountain ranges. This blend of creativity and pedagogy laid the groundwork for everything from anatomical drawings to NASA star maps. By the time universities rose in Bologna and Paris, their libraries were already stocked with these illuminated textbooks, their margins crammed with student notes. A law manuscript from Padua shows heated debates inked between lines, proof that the tradition of scribbling in margins started long before modern lecture halls. The leap from parchment to printed page wasn't a rupture, but a continuation. When Galileo sketched the moon's craters or Lavoisier diagrammed chemical reactions, they stood on the shoulders of those unnamed monks who first dared to paint knowledge as beautifully as they revered it. Medieval classrooms didn't have blackboards or worksheets, they had illuminated manuscripts, their pages alive with lessons that taught generations how to read, reason, and navigate the world. These weren't just books, they were interactive textbooks where every margin and miniature served a purpose. Take the Grammatica of Aelius Donatus, a 4th century Latin primer copied endlessly in monastic scriptoria. Its pages paired dry conjugations with whimsical illustrations, a donkey in a scholar's cap misdeclining verbs, or a fox correcting a monk's grammar, turning rote memorization into something memorable. Students traced their fingers over these ink jokes, absorbing syntax through humor, proving that pedagogy hasn't changed as much as we think. For moral instruction, Becheries reigned supreme. These fantastical encyclopedias blended biology and allegory, presenting creatures real and imagined as walking object lessons. The Aberdeen bestiary describes the pelican pecking its breast to feed its young with blood, a metaphor for Christ's sacrifice alongside practical notes on falconry and veterinary care. A unicorn's horn purified water, teaching piety through pseudoscience. A beaver's self-castration to escape hunters became a parable about resisting temptation. The genius lay in their duality. A noble's child might marvel at the golden illuminations, while a physician referenced the same pages for animal-based remedies. Knowledge wasn't compartmentalized. It was a tapestry where faith, fact, and fable intertwined. Philosophy found its home in glossed manuscripts, where original texts like Aristotle's Logic were surrounded by layers of commentary, medieval equivalent of margin notes in a college textbook. The Glossa Ordinaria, a 12th century staple, packed the Bible with interlinear explanations, creating a dialogue across centuries. Students debated these interpretations in cathedral schools, their arguments preserved as fresh annotations in already crowded margins. One surviving copy from Paris shows a heated exchange in 3 handwriting styles: the original scribe, a professor's rebuttal, and a student's cheeky doodle of a stick figure teacher with smoke coming from his ears. The ripple effects of these teaching tools reached far beyond monasteries. When the Renaissance dawned, artists like Botticelli mined bestiaries for symbolism. His Primavera teams with creatures lifted straight from medieval lore, their meanings intact but repurposed. Alchemists pored over illuminated diagrams, mistaking allegory for recipe, while heraldic designers borrowed beasts from manuscripts to craft coats of arms. Even modern fantasy tropes from J.K. Rowling's hippogriffs to Game of Thrones direwolves owe debts to these illustrated lessons. The line between education and inspiration was always thin. A page teaching Latin might also plant the seed for a painting, a proverb, or an empire's emblem. What's striking is how these manuscripts anticipated modern learning principles. They were multimodal long before the term existed, combining text, image, and tactile engagement. Some had volvels, rotating parchment wheels to calculate Easter dates. They personalized education. Wealthy patrons commissioned custom versions with family portraits inserted into biblical scenes, making the sacred feel personal. Most importantly, they proved that knowledge sticks when wrapped in wonder. A child who laughed at a doodle of a knight fleeing a snail might remember that snail's Latin name Cochlea forever. 7 centuries later, as we swipe through digital textbooks, we're still chasing that same alchemy, the moment when learning stops feeling like work and starts feeling like discovery. Gothic cathedrals soaring toward the heavens, pre-Raphaelite canvases shimmering with jewel-toned figures, these iconic movements didn't emerge from thin air. They were born in the glow of medieval manuscripts, their creators consciously channeling the illuminated pages that had dazzled Europe for centuries. When architect Augustus Pugin designed London's Houses of Parliament in the 1840s, he didn't just borrow pointed arches from Gothic churches, he studied the lateral psalter's intricate borders, translating those coiled vines and playful grotesques into stone carvings that crawled across pillars and spires. Over in France, Violet Leduc's restoration of Notre Dame went beyond structural repairs. He stocked the workshop with facsimiles of the Tres Riches Heuras, insisting stained glass artisans replicate the luminosity of medieval miniatures in their panes. This wasn't nostalgia, it was a deliberate revival of craftsmanship in an industrializing world, a protest against mass production's soullessness. The pre-Raphaelites took this devotion further. Dante Gabriel Rossetti kept a personal copy of the Hours of Catherine of Cleves, its peacock blues and ruby reds bleeding into his portraits of flame-haired muses. In the Annunciation, painter Edward Burne-Jones lifted the Virgin's pose directly from a 15th century Book of Hours, right down to the startled tilt of her head and the gold thread of the angel's robe. But the real alchemy happened in their techniques. Like medieval illuminators, they layered transparent glazes over gold leaf to create ethereal glows, ground pigments by hand, and even used egg tempera, a method abandoned since the Renaissance. The result, paintings like Ophelia by John Everett Millais, where every flower in the drowning maiden's hair is as meticulously detailed as the herbal illustrations in a monastic manuscript. Why does this aesthetic still mesmerize? Partly, it's the tension between discipline and delirium. Medieval illumination balanced mathematical precision, those geometric borders drafted with compasses, with wild flights of fancy like dragons gnawing on psalm verses. The Victorians, overwhelmed by steam engines and smog, latched onto that harmony of order and whimsy. But there's also the tactile allure. In a digital age, we crave the weight of vellum, the whisper of a turning page, the way gold leaf catches light differently at dawn versus dusk. Contemporary artists like Suzanne Moore and Thomas Ingmeier bridge this gap, creating illuminated manuscripts for modern texts, from Maya Angelou's poetry to Neil Gaiman's Sandman, proving that the form still pulses with life. From Pugin's parliamentary gargoyles to the Klimt-esque gold of the Lady of Shalott, the medieval manuscript's DNA is everywhere. It lives in the stained glass of subway stations, the filigree of Art Nouveau posters, even the pixelated glow of fantasy video games. These artists recognized what we're relearning, that beauty isn't frivolous, it's a survival tactic, a way to etch meaning into the bone when the world feels fleeting. And as we turn to the final chapter of these books' journey, that lesson lingers: how something as fragile as painted parchment could outlast wars, fires, and the march of centuries, not despite its artistry, but because of it. These illuminated pages were never just relics of the past, they were blueprints for survival, painted in gold and ink. When monks layered lapis lazuli over scripture or tucked herbal remedies into psalm margins, they were doing more than creating art. They were building arks, vessels sturdy enough to carry knowledge through storms of war, plague, and time itself. Today, in our digital age where information flickers across screens only to vanish with a refresh, these manuscripts whisper a counterintuitive truth. Endurance isn't about speed or volume, but depth and care. A single medieval parchment could hold an entire universe: star charts guiding farmers, prayers comforting the sick, satirical doodles mocking the powerful, all nested together in vibrant harmony. Compare that to our fragmented feeds, where algorithms splinter attention and data decays with every platform update. The irony is stark. We've never had more tools to preserve knowledge, yet so much feels perilously fleeting. But the real lesson isn't about materials, it's about intention. Those medieval artists didn't just record facts, they embodied them, grinding pigments by hand, breathing over gold leaf, stitching quires with gut thread. Their labor was a form of devotion, a pact with the future. In an era obsessed with digital permanence, blockchain, cloud storage, endless backups, we've lost something vital: the understanding that survival requires more than storage. It demands meaning. When a 14-year-old in Mumbai pores over digitized pages of the Book of Kells, tracing Celtic knots with her cursor, she's not just seeing art. She's touching a chain of hands from the monk who painted it to the conservators who scanned it, all insisting this matters enough to last. The call isn't to abandon technology, but to borrow wisdom from the scriptorium. Like those monks who blended scripture with science, we might design digital spaces where knowledge isn't just stored but honored, where a climate dataset shines with the urgency of a medieval apocalypse, or a child's pandemic diary is framed with the care of an illuminated initial. Already, projects like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine and Google's Cultural Institutes echo this ethos, treating URLs and JPEG with the reverence once reserved for vellum. Even the rise of handcrafted journals and calligraphy workshops hints at a craving for tactile connection in a swipe and tap world. Yet preservation is only half the battle. These manuscripts survived because they were used, thumbed by healers, debated by scholars, clutched by the dying. Their stains and wrinkles are badges of honor. Similarly, our greatest digital triumphs, Wikipedia's collaborative edits, open source software communities thrive when knowledge is actively wrestled with, not just archived. The danger lies in treating culture as something behind glass, whether physical or virtual. A manuscript in a museum case and a PDF buried in a forgotten folder share the same fate, out of sight, out of life. So what does survival look like today? Perhaps it's a teacher projecting the Luttrell Salter's peasant scenes to discuss income inequality, or a programmer encoding environmental data in a format that outlasts Silicon Valley's next collapse. It might be as simple as writing a family recipe in a notebook instead of texting it, one stroke of ink at a time. The medium matters less than the mindfulness. Those medieval pages remind us that endurance is a creative act, demanding both pigment and purpose, gold leaf and grit. Now we turn the question to you. In your life, whether you're an artist, a student, or someone scrolling through history videos, what feels worth preserving? Is it a story, a skill, a tradition? Share it in the comments, or better yet, find a way to etch it into the world with the same fierce care as those long ago illuminators. Because 7 centuries from now, when our touchscreens are dust, what will remain isn't just what we saved, but how deeply we loved it. If these illuminated pages have sparked your curiosity, why not join a community just as captivated as you are? Hit that like button if you discovered something new today, and subscribe to keep unraveling history's hidden masterpieces with us. The journey doesn't end here. Dive deeper with treasures like Christopher de Hamel's Meetings with Remarkable Manuscripts, a book that feels like walking through a scriptorium with a lantern, or explore the British Library's digital collections where you can zoom into every brushstroke of the Lindisfarne Gospels from your couch. Maybe you're itching to try your hand at illumination. Grab a quill, and some gouache modern calligraphers like Patricia Lovett offer tutorials that'll have you painting initials worthy of a medieval duke. But here's where you become part of the story. Drop a comment below telling us what stunned you most. Was it the alchemy of turning crushed gems into pigment, the cheeky margin doodles, or the way these books became lifelines during plagues? Your thoughts might just inspire our next deep dive. And if you've got a local museum with medieval collections, pay them a visit. There's nothing like standing before a page that survived wars and fires, feeling the weight of centuries in its gold leaf. This isn't just about preserving parchment, it's about safeguarding humanity's collective memory. Every time we decode a monk's marginal note or replicate a forgotten pigment, we're adding another stitch to the tapestry of time. So whether you're a history buff, an art lover, or someone who just stumbled onto this video, you're now part of the chain that keeps these stories alive. Let's make sure the next 1,000 years are just as illuminated.